Hello and welcome to the new season of Beyond Autistic Burnout, formerly Mind Your Autistic Brain. We are so excited with all the amazing content and conversations that we have planned this month. Today, I'm really thrilled to have you here as we dive into the topic of managing ADHD autistic burnout at work. And guess what? We have an incredible guest joining us today, Oliver Fenghour from Advance the Disability Consultants. Oliver is an expert in neuroinclusion, teaching companies and managers how to create their culture and optimize the impact of every individual within the organization. I am beyond excited to take you on an incredible journey of hope, possibility, and self discovery today. You see, I've been through quite the roller coaster when it comes to burnout at different stages of my career. That roller coaster began at the age of 6 years old for me and lasted for almost 40 years, that chronic cycle burnout loop. But in my career, there were different things that I experienced as part of the burnout journey. So back in my 20s, I was completely focused on launching my career, but I was afraid of making mistakes. Everything had to be perfect. So I pushed myself beyond my limits. I was working long hours and neglecting my own needs. I thought everyone else was doing the same thing, but little did I know that it would lead to overwhelming exhaustion. So fast forward to my 30s, and I became a new mom to two young children, balancing family life and my career. It became a major challenge. I felt like it was like I was failing because I hadn't reached certain promotions I believed that I should have. The guilt and the shame took a toll on both my work and my home life, and I found myself burnout on all fronts. In my 40s, everything hit rock bottom. This was like the worst burnout, ghost pepper level 5, so hot that I was not. I faced the worst burnout of my life, grappling with chronic cycle burnout, unemployment, divorce, and health issues. I realized I couldn't keep living this way. It was either change or face the consequences. That turning point led me on a transformational journey of healing and self discovery. Today, as I approach my 50s, I am proud to say I have spent 4 years experiencing sustainable energy and thriving, free from the chronic cycle of burnout, shutdowns, and meltdown, experiencing joy, peace, and creativity like never before. As you heard in my personal burnout experience throughout different career stages and ages, burnout is a real challenge we all face. And here's the exciting part. Oliver and I will be sharing a powerful conversation with you today where we'll discuss how to identify burnout in a variety of neurotypes, best tips and practices for managing yourself and your team in burnout, and more. Together, we can actively work towards decreasing the current burnout rate. With over 77% of employees experiencing burnout right now, we got some work to do, folks. But wait, there's more. I'm really thrilled to announce that pre-orders for my upcoming book, Unleashing Sustainable Energy, a strategic approach to transforming spicy burnout for ADHD autistic professionals, it will be open this Friday, August the 4th, to start purchasing your books. So be sure to reserve your copy and embark on a journey of transformation and empowerment with me. Are you ready to thrive, listeners? Are you ready to thrive, watchers? Let's dive into this insightful conversation with Oliver and gain invaluable strategies to create a workplace where everyone can shine. Let's make a difference and embrace a life of sustainable energy. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to get started, and I'm ready to start this conversation with Oliver.
Welcome to Beyond Autistic Burnout, the talk show designed to empower ADHD autistic professionals like you to thrive in your career, life, and beyond. I'm Carole Jean Whittington, an ADHD autistic business professional who's not just surviving, but thriving after decades in burnout. And I'm thrilled to have you here with us. Each episode, I'll be joined by inspiring guests as we dive deep into transformative strategies and insights. We'll show you how to break free from burnout, ignite sustainable energy, and embrace your authentic self. Together, we'll navigate career challenges, nurture relationships, and excel in every aspect of life. It's time to fuel your success and embark on your journey of empowerment. Let's take this incredible journey together. Get ready to be an authentic leader and unleash sustainable energy in your life. Welcome to Beyond Autistic Burnout. Let's start thriving.
Welcome to the show, Oliver. I am so excited to be having this conversation with you today because we've had so many people when I asked, hey, what's the hardest part of navigating burnout at work for you? And we had so many people write in and share that it was just the things that seemed really big and really hard. It was not just they were really big and really hard. It was that they were constantly really big and really hard. And it was like the further they got into burnout and the less they were talking about it and sharing because they didn't think they could with their manager or with their teammates at work, the worse burnout got. I know that you have had some experiences with this in your life, and you've got some great insights that you're going to share with us today. So, Oliver, what has been your personal experience with burnout at work? Kind of give us a little bit of framework for how did that show up for you?
Yeah, thanks, Carole Jean, and thanks everybody wherever you are in the world for listening to us both today. Yeah, it's really great, Carole Jean, to hear like your personal story. I think certainly for me, I mean, I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism, when that was what it was known as. So when I was at the age of 10, quite a long time ago. I'm going to be a bit more candid about my age, I think. I'm going to be really honest. For me, in all honesty, I suppose now as I get to a sort of more advanced years, that I think as you get older, I became a father a couple of months ago, and it gives you a bit of sort of self perspective on life. That the biggest thing that I found, and as becoming sort of as I got older in life, is conformity is probably the biggest thing I found with burnout. Following policies, procedures, rules, and organizational structure, an organizational sort of architecture that isn't really geared for somebody with autism in the workplace. How do I navigate this rule? Why is this policy in place? Why is this procedure in place? Why do I have to report to this line manager? Why is this person included in an email? Why do I have to work with this team when that's not part of a team I'm a part of? And I think for me personally, when I was diagnosed at the age of 10, I kept thinking, well, why am I always out of school? Why am I constantly having go on train journeys to London every month to see a professor of neurology? Why am I constantly going to see psychotherapists, neuropsychiatrists, when I just want to spend time with my friends and my peers? And I think for me, as much as anything, that I suppose I reflect upon it now, that my teenage years, my years at secondary school in the UK, they were years of real emotional trauma of hiding who I really was. That I felt with my autism, it was a shame, and it was a stigma, and almost a, I don't really like saying this, but it was like a dirty secret that if I shared with people, I would be judged really negatively by my peers. And I remember at school that because I was always that child that was different, always that child that was seen as a little bit awkward, that I was bullied as a result of that, and that was really quite a difficult period in my life. And I remember leaving school at 16. Also, I was sort of like to let everybody know I graduated with a law degree about 3 weeks ago as well. So it's proof that you can achieve anything in life if you put your mind to it.
But I mean, Oliver, can you pack anything else into the last 6 months? I mean, you graduate with your law degree, you become a father. I mean, let's just pack it all in there. But, you're bringing up something that I think Carolina put in the comments as well. And this is something you and I have talked about. It's, if you have disclosed at work, if you finally did get to a place where either you were really desperate and you needed additional help or accommodations, and you finally just said, hey, I'm just going to just navigate it. I'm just going to figure out what's going to happen because I need some help. And it's getting so bad that, at some point you even get to this place where you're like, okay, either I'm going to quit because I can't seem to continue in this job, or I'm going to have to figure out how to take like family medical leave, something like that to get yourself the time that because maybe you've already burned through your sick day. Maybe you've already burned through your, paid vacation or leave time. And sometimes when burnout hits, when it comes to like asking for vacation time and things like that, because a lot of times we bank those days and we think I can just use those. Well, you have to get approval for those days. And it's not always just like immediately when you need it. So those things kind of come in. But Carolina shared, she has disclosed some things at work, and then everything comes back to anytime she has any challenge or anything comes up, what's coming up for the people around her is like, oh, well, it's your condition, or it's your disorder, or it's whatever, you've shared with people. And then that becomes the thing, like, no matter what your experience or challenge, or like, it could be the same as everybody else's, but because you've disclosed or people know, then that's the thing that comes up. And like you were talking about, the emotional trauma and the masking, the things that we experience up to our life, that doesn't just disappear when we show up at work. We bring those with us. I mean, what are some of the things that are kind of coming up as we're digging in a little bit more to this, Oliver?
I think it's really interesting there hearing what you said about Carolina. It says that I think a society that was as a saying in life that we fear what we don't know. And if you look at, as I was sort of briefly touching upon at the beginning, organizational architectures and frameworks are inherently ableist in nature. They're inherently geared towards supporting anyone who fits a certain criteria, a certain neat category or box. And I think that's a big part of the challenge, that we can bring in training and education for teams. Yes, we can provide accommodations and reasonable adjustments in the workplace, but ultimately a lot of it, organizations are people. It's about culture. It's about creating. I saw this really interesting post earlier on LinkedIn. One of my peers in one of our peers in the neurodiversity space made a very good point, saying that actually it's not incumbent upon someone who's neurodivergent to actually actively disclose. The organizational culture has to create that psychologically safe working environment for somebody to feel like, I can disclose and I feel like I can actually be respected as Oliver, an individual, and not Oliver, a disability, or Oliver, a problem. And I think that is the biggest challenge there, that organization is obviously using Paulina's difference against her in a negative way. They're not actually providing appropriate reasonable adjustment support. Having really got to know her as an individual, it seems to me that they're treating her as a disability when it suits them, and they're not treating her, understanding her as a person, understanding her needs and requirements. Because guess what? Reasonable adjustments and accommodations, they don't exist in a fixed bubble or entity. They adapt and evolve over time, like anybody's needs and reasonable adjustments, whether you're neurotypical, neurodivergent, no matter who you are, we're all individuals and human beings first and foremost, and our needs and requirements will change and adapt over time. It's like Maslow's theory of needs. You're at that hierarchy of needs. At the bottom of the needs are your needs to eat, your need to drink. As you get further up the needs, it's a need to earn money, need to have a property. So they need to have a career. They adapt and evolve over periods of time. And I think that's an important thing to consider. But we certainly need to look at how we change organizational designs and frameworks, because if we don't really change the architecture and the framework of organizations, then we don't really ensure that people with autism can actively thrive in the workplace, because we're having to try harder and harder to succeed, because we probably had maybe many negative experiences where we've resigned from jobs, we've been sacked from jobs. Crikey, I can't remember how many times I've resigned from jobs, or I've been dismissed from jobs because my face didn't fit. I didn't fit with the culture. Well, what does that look like? That doesn't really tell you anything. It just tells me that I didn't fail. The organization failed. The organization failed because it didn't really get to know me as an individual. It didn't provide the correct support and reasonable adjustment mechanisms. It didn't actually actively engage in training and education around autism in the workplace. Things don't take a giant leap of faith to kind of make a big difference in an organization. But it's ultimately about sort of changing the culture. It's changing hearts and minds. And I think that if we can really change the culture, then the other pieces of the jigsaw puzzle come into play. But I strongly believe that we're slowly but surely getting on the road there. But we've also got a long way to go. And I think it's important that if we're going to talk about autism in the workplace, we've got to talk about it positively and for the right kinds of reasons, and not just a tick box exercise every few months because it ticks a nice week or date in the calendar. We're talking about fundamentally people's lives. And I mean, how many of us here have been marginalized on the peripheries of the labor market? How many of us haven't been able to access the labor market? How many of us have never been employed? How many of us have found that actually ultimately we found that working for ourselves has been more beneficial, simply for the fact that we're our own bosses. And you often find that a lot of people with autism tend to work for themselves simply for the fact that we have the freedom and creativity to be the best version of ourselves possible, free from the stiflingness of matrix structures and all the associated sort of ableist processes and policies that don't really factor in our needs and requirements.
And Oliver, I think you kind of bring us to the place of like, yes, and that's what you and I do as consultants. We go in and we look at company culture. We look at from a change management perspective, how do we start to help companies, cultures, and teams start creating the psychological safety so that we can have open conversations about our preferences, our needs, because we all have them as humans. We all have them. And how we need a certain thing in a certain moment, we absolutely need to be able to have those conversations, because what we're looking at right now is statistically the highest percentage of burnout in the workplace and in life across the board. Because I think, as we all know, I say spicy burnout. Spicy burnout for us doesn't just show up at work, it shows up everywhere in our life. And it doesn't just impact us in the workplace, this impacts us at home. We bring this home to our family, to our children, to our partners, to our friends. That's the experience here. And as we start to talk about, well, yes, we have a long way to go as far as a lot of company cultures. And Veronica was sharing that she's working in this great company culture where she is seen as the person first. She's able to disclose, and that is, oh gosh, yes, so excited to hear that. But there's places that are not. And as we're kind of taking this conversation around how is this showing up at work, how do we start to navigate this at work? Oliver, I know you've got a legal background and you're looking at, as far as UK law, what are the things that companies are required to do? That's part of what we look at, to make sure that we're all being compliant from a legal standpoint. But let's just talk about, like, from a human standpoint, how do I even start to recognize that I'm in burnout? Because for me personally, I'm late identified. I didn't know that I was autistic till I was almost 40. I knew I was ADHD in my mid 20s, but I didn't really understand what burnout was for me. I didn't understand that I was experiencing burnout. I had been burned out since my first burnout was at the age of 6. So my experience and my understanding of how tired I was, overwhelmed and exhausted, how my executive function, the skills and abilities that I had would be impacted day to day, how I was losing things that I used to be able to do all of a sudden, I couldn't do them. And just those sensory sensitivities that would go into hyperdrive. And I just thought, this is just how I experience life. And this is the way everybody has these things. I just don't manage it as well. And then when we go into that psychological safety aspect, then the other thing that comes up is I don't feel safe to not do everything that I'm supposed to do at work. I have to be the best. I have to outperform everybody. Cannot have anything wrong. I have to have more answers than everybody else, because if I don't, it's not safe. And that's one of the biggest contributing factors that we see in burnout, is people not recognizing that they're even experiencing it. And when we're talking about teams, and especially as managers, we can experience burnout as managers, but we have to be able to recognize it in ourselves, and we have to be able to recognize it in our team, in a variety of neurotypes in our team, because, hey folks, we're already there, right? It's not like, oh, you have to hire us and have these places specifically for us. We're already there. We're already in your boardrooms. We just don't feel comfortable telling you. So as we're talking about all of the elements of, number one, just knowing if you're in burnout, identifying if you're in burnout, and then how, as a manager, do I start to recognize? Well, you start some conversations. First of all, you actually check in with your people. And Oliver and I are planning a lunch and learn series on the 17th and 18th of this month. And we've got the sign up link down in the comments and the show notes. We would love for you to join us, because we're going to be giving you some strategies. I'll be sharing my 7 steps to how do we have the conversation. If we're the manager, how do we protect our own energy and have the conversation where we can help our team members in burnout? And also from the reverse side of, if you're in burnout, how do you start having that conversation with your manager or with your team? And Oliver, you've got some insights that you wanted to share around this. What are some conversation points? What are some things that you found really make a difference when we're starting to broach the subject of, hey, I'm burned out, I need some help?
Yeah, I think that's some really sort of really great points that you make there, Carole Jean. I think I think as much as anything, I certainly think as a line manager, it's under, if you understand the individual as a human being first and foremost, and not just a tick box exercise because you've got someone who's neurodivergent who has have autism in your team. I think it's understanding. Perhaps are they out of routine? I mean, I don't know about many of you on today's session, but I thrive off a structure and routine. I remember I was working in a job in London, and I was doing 60-hour weeks for probably, if I'm honest, the UK minimum wage, if I'm being really honest. But I thought it was a phenomenal opportunity. So I'd religiously get the same train every single day, the 7:30 train in the morning. I know it well. And I'd get home most evenings about 7 o'clock at night. I'd be exhausted, but I was always an hour in to work for everybody else because I thought I can't cope with the white lights on the white walls, the busy open plan, noisy office with everybody constantly chattering, not knowing how to concentrate in a room, how to focus on one conversation when multiple people were speaking to me. And I thought, well, at least if I start my job an hour early, I can actually get some of my work done. But I always felt like I sort of had to overcompensate, and my line managers never seemed to really kind of acknowledge that. They what's one of those galling aspects of it is two of my senior line managers actually had relatives with autism, so they should have known better. So they should have actually put accommodations and reasonable adjustments in place to actually effectively support me, but also understand the signs that I was struggling with burnout, that I'd come to work exhausted every day. I'd make constant mistakes because I couldn't follow all the instructions I was being given because there was too much information, that I'd make mistakes with data entry. And it was just like, well, you're not working to the same standard as everybody else. And that line managers who were from other teams who were supposed to be aware of my autism weren't aware because my immediate managers thought it wasn't relevant. So then eventually I got to a point where I remember just having a nervous breakdown, if I'm honest, and considering taking my own life, simply for the fact that I didn't see what was the point in living anymore, because I couldn't succeed in that job, and I thought, well, I had failed, and that this was a really good opportunity, and I wasn't delivering in the way I should. But a good line manager should have understood that I was overworking, I was making too many mistakes. My diet was bad. There's a clear link between your physical and your mental health, and sometimes as people with autism, we overcompensate for our shortcomings by eating the wrong kinds of diets. I was doing that. I was distant from my friends and my family and my loved ones. I was probably more sort of socially awkward and difficult to be around than I'd ever been. But no one had kind of recognized those kinds of steps. And ultimately, there's a difference between managing and leading. Managing implies you're coping and dealing. Leading is about inspiring, engagement, and empowering people. And ultimately, there was no real leaders there. They were just managers who just basically were fulfilling a job. They didn't really invest the time to understand me. And I think any good organization should first and foremost should be understanding the individual. That's the absolute most basic requirements of it. And I think it's great, like we see an awful lot of talk around neurodiversity at work and autism hiring programs. Now, they're okay to a point, but the problem is we have to be careful as well. Are we just picking off the brightest and best people who have autism, who happen to tick the boxes because we want to do the latest thing in IT by employing lots of people to be software engineers who all happen to have autism? Because the myth goes, and I hear this so many times. I was chatting with some delegates on a conference I was doing a few months ago, and one of the ladies had ADHD, and she said to me, "Do you know what?" She said, "I hear all the time that everybody who has autism or ADHD is good at IT," and I'm like, well, I'm not good at IT. I'm useless at IT half the time. I shouldn't admit this to everybody, by the way, but and I'm just like, but that could say that everybody likes the color blue. It just doesn't make any sense, really. It talk about massive generalizations and stereotypes. It's basically saying that all Italian drivers drive manically in inner city areas. I apologize if there's anyone from Italy here, by the way, just to clarify. I'm sure you're a very good driver. But just to give you some ideas of these kind of awful stereotypes and generalizations we have, how about having in organizations universal design frameworks that help encourage everybody, regardless of whether they've disclosed or not, to support them with the right support mechanisms, accommodations in place, where line managers actively have the right training and support? Because ultimately, for many of you, perhaps who are line managers and leaders in your organization on today's call, that's probably quite a stressful experience. And understanding how to support someone who has autism in your workplace, perhaps it's the first time you've knowingly supported someone with autism in your workplace, and that can be quite daunting. Reaching out for support, perhaps it's you worry about how it makes you look in terms of your own competency and your own pride as a manager, but you need to park that. I can see Michael's comment there. Yeah, I hate computers. Yeah, Michael. Park your sort of shortcomings and insecurities at the door and think, you know what, I'm going to have an open mind and a broad mind about, actually, you know what, I want to learn and I want to be the best leader possible. And I think that's a really important thing to consider, because ultimately, if we do those things, then we prevent a lot of people with autism going through those horrible stages of burnout where they get to the point where you end up quitting a job, you end up getting sacked from a job because you haven't had the support. And then ultimately, as we were sort of saying a little bit, like HR becomes a function which in a business which becomes reactive and doesn't really solve the purpose of supporting you properly. So yeah, that's kind of sort of some of my sort of thoughts in that space, really.
You have brought in so many talking points. My brain is just lighting up over here. I know the chat box is going crazy over here. Everybody's lighting up as you're talking too, because it's so relatable. And, when we're talking about from the management side, when we're going in and consulting and working with teams from the NeuroDrive team, what we're doing and what advanced the disability consultants, what you do is we go in and we start having these conversations, because if we are only seeing something through the lens that we can notice something. So my background's in vision science. So you can take these different colored lenses and you can look through things, and some lenses will allow you to see something, and you put another lens on and all of a sudden it disappears. So a lot of times when we're talking about recognizing or identifying how stress and burnout shows up within different neurotypes, because folks, we know this, but not the rest of the world always knows this. It is not just our brain that is neurodistinct and wonderfully wired, it is also our bodies. So when we are responding to stress, when we are under great stress or duress, that shows up differently for a lot of us, how it presents. So part of the big conversation here is also, are we within ourselves recognizing burnout? Because I know I went for decades and didn't know that's what it was. I just thought I wasn't doing well. I wasn't navigating or figuring things out. I wasn't getting it like everybody else, right? I thought I was failing. And then I figured out, oh, shoot, I actually got a spicy burnout. I don't just have burnout, I got spicy burnout. And how that looks and presents. Because like Oliver was sharing, he was noticing the lights, the sounds. He needed to get into work early. And this was a conversation I had not too long ago with some people in an organization. And it was, we have some cultural issues because you have these societal norms that are within companies. So here I'm gonna hit something that might touch some spots for folks. And it might be relatable. So you go in to work an hour early because it's quiet. You can get some things done before everybody starts piling in, before all of the sounds and all of the city things, wherever you're living. That gives you that window to get some stuff done. And you feel like you can actually accomplish some of the things on that to-do list you have for the day. But your coworkers, your boss, because you're in before them, they think, what are you trying to show off? You trying to show us up? Are you gunning for a promotion? Right? Then you've got all of these things and you're like, heck no. I'm just trying to get ahead of the day. I'm trying to navigate stuff so that I'm not like crashing at lunchtime, and I've actually gotten something done on my day. Because if I come in when everybody else comes in, it is so much harder. And it's the stories and the perception and the things that happen because there aren't conversations happening. So kind of like what you had described, Oliver, when things weren't going well, when you were making these mistakes at work that normally maybe you wouldn't have been making, or there was stuff going on where to you it was like, man, this is totally obvious. How do other people not see it? But because it's not showing up in a way that people are paying attention to go, oh, that could be burnout. But instead, I think even just backing it up to the basic human question is not just why, but is there something going on? I noticed that. this is something that you've made this error on a couple of times. And I know that you're really an attentive person. Can you tell me kind of what's going on? Are you have something happening that I might be able to help you with? Is there an aspect of your job or something where I could support you better? When we start talking about, and just from a human to human level, when are your peak performance hours? What's your best way to communicate? How do you want me to communicate with you? How do you want to communicate with me? What works best? Because those two things can be totally different, right? Like, I have a different communication style that I like to give information in, and I have one I like to receive information in. But what are some of those things, like, guys out in the chat, like, what are some of those things that you've noticed, like, when you start to try and kind of accommodate yourself, that the story or the narrative that's coming back at you from coworkers is a little different? Oliver, have you had that happen before?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a sort of an interesting one where I certainly worked in teams where it was a bit like coming to work early, like you said, and just being seen as, oh, why are you coming to work early? But also, I suppose, working in organisations where nobody ever really wanted to talk about sort of my differences or how to sort of really sort of support me properly. And I think one of the biggest problems with teams is they're very cliquey, aren't they? Societal groups become societal structures, but also I think one of the biggest challenges we have is a lot of organizations are straddled across different countries, different cultures, different jurisdictions. How do you then leverage that idea of understanding autism in the workplace, not just the exception, but the rule, the cultural norm, the cultural expectation, across countries where perhaps that conversation isn't happening, across employees who think, oh, well, that person is just strange or they're peculiar, and not realizing that actually we need to sort of properly support them. And it comes from engaging in a conversation with the individual. But it's not just about inclusion for someone with autism in a workplace, is actively integrating them. It's making sure that they're like any other employee, that they've got co-workers they work well with, other team members they actively get on with. But it was interesting. I was so sort of entranced by what you were saying, Carole Jean. I completely forgot you asked me to speak. It's interesting for me, actually. What I was going to say is that where I think it's interesting that the playing field has been leveled, and this is something I thought about for a long time, is our good friend COVID-19. That isn't it quite a sad, sorry indictment across society globally that we had to have a global pandemic which has killed in the millions of people to actively make changes and level the playing field for people with autism in the workplace. How many people here probably had the access to hybrid or flexible working, or the options for flexible working options before COVID? Probably very few organizations offered it, because it was like 5 days a week, you must all be in the office. I want you to do 9 to 5 every day with half an hour for lunch. This is what you'll do every day of the week. And you feel like you're sort of chained to your desk. There's hot desking. I don't know about many of you, but why can't I have fixed desk space in a quiet, closed off part of the office that I'm in, so I can actively concentrate and do my work to the standard that I want to do it to? But COVID-19, in a sad kind of sort of way, is a Pyrrhic victory for many of us, because we've been able to work from home. We've been able to get the best out of ourselves in work environments that cater for our needs and play to our strengths. But now we're seeing an erosion of that, because many organizations now think it's important that everybody should be back in the office 5 days a week. Well, that's utter nonsense. How on earth are we creating inclusive workplaces if we're expecting people with autism and ADHD to be in the office 5 days a week in environments that at times can be wholly unsuitable for them? And I think that is a big concern. But then I suppose also the flip side of the coin, it's like, well, we also need to make sure that we're actively supporting our mental and physical health as much as anything. So going to there has to be a balance between the two, and I feel that we're in danger of eroding. I don't want to say this really strangely, but the hard work that's been undone over the last 3 years. It's bad for business, by the way, but the conversations that I'm having with Carole Jean and many people around the globe would probably never have happened because of COVID. But that it's opened up. We've opened up our living rooms to everybody. Now we need to keep that going. We need to ensure that there is that sort of closeness in presence and mind, because we've done that. But if we go back and say it's 5 days a week in the office, how many people with autism are going to lose their jobs? How many people with autism are going to be burnt out? How many of them will quit their employment? How many more people will just be another with autism will just be another statistic in the global labour market because we simply haven't done enough? And that is any organisation thinking about having all of their employees back 5 days a week. In a way, shame on you. In all honesty.
This Minachki Iyer, she has North Star Cafe here on LinkedIn. And this morning, she and Priya had this incredible conversation around the human side of tech. And one of the conversations that they were having this morning, and I was just lighting up going, I can't wait to talk to Oliver because this is going to fold into our conversation so beautifully. And you, of course, just looped us there perfectly without me ever saying anything, which I love so much. But, it was when you go back, people, and Minachki worked in IT, and that's sort of her background. And she said, look, 25 years ago, we had all this hybrid and remote working. That was kind of the norm. We've been doing this for a long time. The rest of the world, I remember that was one of the things that's before the pandemic, because people didn't have to figure it out. It was like a quote unquote bonus for, excellent performance that you could work from home or have a remote hybrid day, right? And all of a sudden, all of the tech has transformed. And now, everybody was working from home. We figured it out. It wasn't an impossible thing. It was almost like, in sort of my opinion, well, we're going to put up these barriers because we're going to make sure that not everybody gets to work from home. It's a privilege because, we need to be able to manage your performance. I mean, if we're going to talk about micromanaging some trust issues and cultural, cultural things in our corporations, let's talk about the micromanaging part of it. But let's also talk about the benefits that this has actually given us when we look at the human side of tech, because we can connect. I think we have proven hand over fist, time after time over the last 3 years, human connection, when you are on the other side of the computer screen, is possible. It happens. Scientific studies have even been done showing the experience of the human connection that we can have through tech. And I think that when we're looking at how we work, how we connect, how we communicate, how we're getting our needs met. Okay, so here it is. Burnout is consistent unmet needs. And if we look at from the business side of things, we create businesses to solve problems. We are trying to help people solve a problem that they have. Otherwise, they're not going to buy anything, right? Let's just boil it down to the basics. As humans, we all have needs. We have needs that need to get fulfilled. For a lot of us who are autistic and ADHD, number one, we have suppressed our needs because we've been in survival mode or we've been in a protective mode for so long because our experience with the world has told us you're wrong, you're broken, you're doing it wrong, you're weird. And so we turn inward and we're like, okay, well, I'm just going to mask, right? And I mask to the professional level of camouflaging, which is a huge energy drainer. And our needs aren't getting met because, number one, we aren't even acknowledging that we have needs. And by the way, folks, you got needs. You got 30 of them. Basic human needs, there's 30. Not 5, not just like your basic physiological needs. And when we start to just really start having these conversations around what are the needs that I have? Well, tech can play into that. How are we getting a need met? Well, does it have to look like the way everybody else gets it met? No. But when we don't have conversations like this, it's really hard to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And we have to be compassionately curious and we have to be willing to try things. And here's the truth about when you try things, when you experiment, 98% of them are things that don't work out the way you expected them to, but you've gained information that gets you to the answer. And if we as companies are created to solve problems and help people solve problems, Well, first and foremost, we need to turn inward and look at how am I meeting the needs? How am I solving the problems that are happening for my employees? How am I doing that first? Because you can't help anybody else if you're not helping within your own house first, right? So, one of the things that I think is really important that we talk about is if we're starting to notice, hey, I am experiencing burnout and I don't feel comfortable disclosing. Like, this is not the time, the place, or maybe the space for me to disclose. So, how do you start to get those unmet needs met at work? What are some of, I know you've got a couple that you have on your personal list there, Oliver. What are a couple of those things that you could share with people today? And I'll share mine after yours to start getting those needs met where you aren't having necessarily to disclose your neurotype or what's going on, but you can start getting some help. How do we do that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think as much as anything, it's having an honest conversation with your line manager, and maybe there's colleagues in your team that you have a good relationship with, and you feel that you can trust as much as anything. I think that's a really important thing to consider. But I think as much as anything, when we talk about sort of burnout, I think you look at a lot of organisations that burnout really starts with the fact that too many organisations, everybody looks, thinks, and behaves the same. And that's a big part of the problem. When everybody looks, thinks, and behaves the same, and you bring someone in, it's like going into a pub, say, for example, in a village, and everybody in the village looks, thinks, and behaves the same, and then you come there and you're a total outsider. You can literally hear a pin drop as you go through that door. It's the same as having autism and going into a workplace where you've been given the job probably on a meritocratic basis. But is there an element of you've been given the job because it's ticking a D and I box as much as anything? And a lot of organizations, as I sort of mentioned earlier, they remember about the inclusion bit, but do they actually properly integrate someone with autism properly into their team? And that's the biggest challenge when we have so many people who think, look, think, behave the same. We then come up against the organizational architecture and frameworks that is still inherently ableist in nature, and a disclosure is a very, I think for a lot of us, it's a really personal journey. Now, for me personally, I've been happy for many years to shout from the rooftops about my autism, but that wasn't always the case. I certainly think working in a space doing advocacy and sharing my personal story, probably about 6 or so years ago, helped me helped me accept who I am. Autism doesn't define me, but it is also a part of my everyday life in a way, and I recognize when I'm in burnout because of my autism. But as much as anything, I'm fortunate that working for myself and organizations I work with, that I work with people who want to learn about what I do and learn about me as a person, and I'm sort of fortunate and grateful for that. But I think as much as anything, it's we should have a culture where there is that universal design framework where disclosure is a thing of the past, and reasonable adjustments are just the inherent norm because they're just intrinsically understood, and the fact that a disclosure is linked into that, and that people shouldn't have to disclose because there's inherently the structures in place to support them without that. And I think that's a really important thing to consider. So then as line managers and leaders, it's important that you guys understand the difference between what diversity inclusion is and what belonging and integration are, and understand that this isn't just a tick box exercise, that we can prevent burnout by doing those things, and it all starts with really the beginning of the employee life cycle journey. But it doesn't take a giant leap of faith. But if we put all the pieces of the puzzle, as I said, together, the training, the education, reasonable adjustments and accommodation, and the organizational culture and design framework, then we can make a huge difference. And I think we are slowly there with some of it, but we've also got an awful long way to go. And I think realistically, I never really thought for so long that I experienced burnout. And then I suppose when I look at many of the jobs I've left, I remember one exit interview for a job. It was 10 minutes, and they told me basically to go without any warning. Among a multitude of sort of bad experiences I've had, but probably many of us who are you on the call today can probably relate to those experiences. And we just need to do so much better, but that will ultimately take time. And ultimately, if we keep pushing and nagging, harassing, haranguing organizations, that we will deliver that change, but it won't come straight away. But and then there's also this idea about the Jackie saying about great answer, thank you, about creating a level playing field as well. How many of you have perhaps asked for reasonable adjustments during the interview process and been told, or can I have the questions in advance? This isn't to get some sort of professional advantage or professional gain. This is to actually understand what the interview process is going to look like. Who am I going to meet? What's their personalities like? What's the interview format going to be like? Is it going to be a group interview? Is it going to be an individual interview? Is it going to be kind of any kind of interview assessments in place to understand, so it creates a level of certainty and structure so that we can compete evenly with anybody else on merit. And it's explained to organizations that again should intrinsically just be the norm, and that comes as part of organizational culture. But ultimately, again, that takes time, patience, perseverance, and us just basically all harassing all organizations until intrinsically that is the norm globally.
And I think our burnout numbers and the statistics that I'm seeing in the research and the work that I do, when we've got 89% of the populations at work saying, hey, I have experienced some degree of burnout in the last year, 77% of us going, I am already in it right now. I am already personally experiencing it in this moment. We're all doing it wrong, folks. Nobody is getting this right now, apparently. And so I think that's one of the most important parts to just honestly just acknowledge that we are all failing in getting our needs met, in communicating our needs to ourselves and to one another. And really, that's where we've got to start. And if we're not disclosing at work because it isn't a safe place to do so, or it doesn't feel like that is the safe place to do so, then how do we begin to even get our needs met, right? Without opening this huge can of worms. And one of the places that I always talk and teach about is know thyself. Number one, because when we ask for help, when we ask for support for something, just as a human, and that's really how we're approaching this, just one human to another, hey, I could use a little help with this right now. I got some stuff happening, because we're all human. We all got stuff. And it doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you broken. It doesn't make you incapable. It makes you human. And I think, first of all, we have to all recognize our humanity right now. And the thing is, I can't ask for something if I can't articulate it. And I've got alexithymia. So, hey, folks, that can be a challenge, right? That's one of the things that I really had to start working on and understanding. It's like, hey, I could feel it. And by the time it hit me, I was so deep in burnout because it had been building and building and building, but I was pushing it down going, I just got to keep going. I can't stop. I don't have time for this, right? Well, sure enough, it made time. I had to make time. My body started shutting down. So, number one, if you do not feel comfortable to disclose, the number one first place that I always suggest with my clients to start is, let's look at your needs list. Let's identify what needs are actually getting met for you right now. And let's identify your number one unmet need. And here's the big shocker for most people. It is not those 5 basic things that we usually name off: food, shelter, water, clothing, financial security, safety, right? When we really start looking at it and we pressure test these 30 basic human needs, the one that usually comes up most often is emotional safety. When we don't feel emotionally safe, like I can't feel my own feelings, it's not safe for me to do that. It's not safe for me to express my emotions, feelings with other people. We usually go to the other people first, but it always starts with us. We got to start identifying, okay, well, what's my sensory profile? Because you can't go into a needs and look at how do I start restoring from burnout until you're also incorporating that. In my global spicy burnout research over the last 3 years, 100% of respondents say they are experiencing an increase in sensory sensitivity in an area of their sensory profile. So as spicy individuals in spicy burnout, autistics and ADHDers, we have to look at all of our human needs. We have to look at what's the one that's like the big one for me. Most often you might think, oh, it's this particular thing because I need help, with this particular aspect of work. But sometimes it's the deeper part that we don't uncover right away. And it's, well, I don't actually feel safe to express my opinion around a particular project or something that's going on at work. And when you have that in your space and you have that in your team and your communication, then energy is actually coming back into you, and instead of draining it. Because think about how much thought energy. And for us high-speed brain folks, we got lots of thought energy being expelled all over the place in the hundreds of thousands of thoughts every day. That's a lot of energy going out. Our thoughts consume a tremendous amount of energy. And when we're constantly trying to make sure we're not making mistakes because that's not safe, how do we start having that conversation with somebody at work? We start by finding some commonality. Hey, I don't know about you, but I don't always feel comfortable sharing how maybe an idea that I have on something because I don't know how everybody's going to respond to it. Have you ever felt that way? Sometimes it's just having that, taking that first step, like Brene Brown says, in that courage and vulnerability. And sometimes when we feel like all we've done has been vulnerable our entire life, that's a really scary place to be. It's like the big, scary, hairy. But until we can start identifying our needs and our sensory profile and how that can empower the conversation to move forward, we're going to keep having these numbers of 80+% of us having experienced burnout or more. Oliver and I are hosting a Lunch and Learn series, and we are really excited about this. If you would love to learn what questions to ask and how to ask them so that you can best identify what specific area is contributing most to an employee's burnout and get the 7 steps to supporting yourself and your team member during burnout, register for a special 30-minute Lunch and Learn with Oliver and me on August 17th or 18th. You get to choose. We've got 2 different time zones there. And we will be answering your biggest burnout questions to help navigate this more effectively at work for you. And hey, be sure to tune in next week as we take burnout to the next area, entrepreneurship. Oliver mentioned so many of us go into entrepreneurship and solopreneurship. So with my special guest next week, Michael John Carley, he will be sharing his insights as a #1 New York Times bestselling author, and he will be flipping the script to interview me on this topic. This journey has taught me invaluable lessons, this journey of chronic cycle burnout to thrive, that burnout isn't something to endure forever, and that love, relationships, family, and even parenting can be sources of joy and fulfillment. We're live every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Please join us on this restoration journey. Oliver, is there anything you'd like to share with everybody as we're wrapping up? And I'm going to kind of check the chat here to see what you guys, because I see you're sharing so many things that you would like people to know about. How do they start to navigate burnout at work? What's your #1 insight for people today?
I think on a personal level, really know yourself as an individual. Really be honest with yourself. What am I? Who am I as a person? What are my strengths and weaknesses? What do I want out of? What do I want out of a work-life balance? Because it shouldn't always just be, as you rightly said, Carole Jean, it shouldn't always just be about work, 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 work. It's about working smart as it is hard. And I think as much as anything, it's really understanding yourself on a real intrinsic level. And I think if you can really be honest with yourself and really understand yourself, then that makes such a big thing in terms of getting the right support from your colleagues, your line managers, and your leaders in an organization. And I think that's a really important thing to think about. But as much as anything, it's important to remember, as we talked about sort of around a little bit around psychological safety, that ultimately, if we don't feel that our ideas are listened to, our opinions not respected, aspects of a project we're doing and not taken on board, our ideas aren't considered or valued, we don't feel like we can contribute on a Teams or a Zoom call, then we're far less likely to feel that we're in an emotionally safe working environment. And I think it's important to call that kind of behavior out in an organization. But also, line managers and leaders, however many of you are on here today, you guys need to get uncomfortable. Guys need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, rather with having frank and honest conversations around autism in your workplace. Because if you're not prepared to do so, then you're not going to bring about the kind of meaningful change that so many of us and many of our peers so desperately need in not just in the workplace, in society. And society, our workplaces are microcosms of our society, and if we can bring our workplaces so that they are autism friendly spaces, then we can bring society along on that journey as well. I just want to say it's been a real pleasure being a host, being a guest on today's chat show. So thank you, Carole Jean, and thank you everybody for tuning in today. And like Carole Jean said, please sign up for our lunch and learn sessions. There's plenty of really good information that we're going to be sharing with you all. So please feel free to sign up, and we hope to see many of you on both of those or one of those workshops.
And I had seen somebody in the chat asking for, hey, do you have this written down somewhere? Yes, we do. And we're going to be giving those out when you sign up for our Lunch and Learn. We will be providing those PDFs for you to download. Thank you so much for joining us today on Beyond Autistic Burnout. I hope you feel energized and empowered to take on the challenges ahead. Remember, you are not alone in this journey. Let's stay connected. Follow me on social media at Mind Your Autistic Brain. Join our thriving community and subscribe to the podcast for more transformative episodes. Together, we'll continue to break free from burnout and unlock our authentic selves. Until next time, this is Carole Jean Whittington signing off. Keep thriving, folks, and tune in next week for this incredible conversation as we move into burnout and entrepreneurship. Take care.